We'll be uncovering the fear of finances, which is a bit sticky, right? We can all acknowledge that. Where does God show up in the midst of finances? How do we hold finances within our own hearts?
Are you worried about making enough money? Let's be honest, every single one of us has wrestled with this concern at one time or another. When deciding how much to work during the summer, when picking a major, while deciding which apartment you can afford. And if we're honest, it probably has an impact on how easy it does or doesn't feel to say yes to following Jesus wherever he leads in our calling. For many of us, money might even feel like the biggest barrier to freely giving him that yes. If that feels true for you, then this episode is for you. Luke and Joanne are back for our third of 4 conversations about common barriers to living into our calling. And this week, we're discussing a big one, finances, and what it looks like to trust the Lord as our loving provider as we pursue his calling in our lives, whether it feels like we have a lot or a little. Welcome to After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. I'm your host and guide, John Steele, and this one's for you, alumni. Joanne and Lucas, welcome back once again.
Round 3.
It's good
Let's
to be
do
back.
this thing.
Yes.
Yes, here we go. We are on conversation number 3 of talking about barriers, and in particular, barriers related to work and calling, and essentially saying yes to the invitations that the Lord has for us in these professional places. And so what does it look like to face some of those barriers head on, and to acknowledge their reality, and to faithfully say yes to Jesus in the midst of wrestling through some of those barriers? And let me see here. Thus far, we've talked about fear in general, just big picture fear. We have talked about family and potential barriers that we might come across with family. And so in episode 3 here, we have a brand new barrier that we are going to discuss. So I'm going to hand it off to you two. What is our third barrier that we're discussing?
We'll be uncovering the fear of finances, which is a bit sticky, right? We can all acknowledge that. Where does God show up in the midst of finances? How do we hold finances within our own hearts? We'll be uncovering some of that today.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. If we're talking about work and calling, and maybe saying yes to a job or saying no to a job or continuing in a job or whatever it might be, wherever the area of discernment is, if we're not being honest that money isn't part of the conversation, then we are just lying to ourselves. So I'm glad that we are, sticky as it may be, I'm glad that we're digging into this conversation today. So yeah, I know at some point we will start stepping into some stories and some scripture, but is there any further framing that would be helpful as we prepare to take deeper steps into this conversation?
I think that the question with finance, it's underlined a little bit, but where our treasure is, that's where our heart is. And so it is the underlining when we talk about finances. And it's not to say that God doesn't desire for us to have finance, to be paid, to receive a salary. Yes. But I think that there is an underlying assumption or a little bit of trickiness to figure out what is it that my heart is saying in the midst when it comes to finances. I could come from a perspective of my own story of growing up as a poor girl from Brooklyn, lived in a place where sometimes we didn't know where our meal was coming from. Sometimes we didn't know what life would give us that day, and especially when it came to finance. And when I had the opportunity to go to college, I thought, well, this is my ticket out. I'm going to make the big buck. Yeah. Was I so wrong about the process? Because God really worked in my heart about where's my treasure, what it meant for me to say, one is I was looking at my upbringing as a place too negative to think that God was actually working in my upbringing to give me a perspective of his kingdom. And second, it was, I really sought work as a way out, where there's actually, work is not the way out. It's actually the place where God is working within me in the process, but it's not the way out of something of poverty, which I think it's a little fine line. Yeah, it's interesting because I think about also we talked about family, but family also has a view of finances. And sometimes their view of finances affects the way that we interact with this. Like, Did my family see me as the savior to take us out of this place? So there is this honoring of my family, of the finances is actually really important on every level. So personally, my community, being the first one to go to college, I'm like, yes, I'm going to get us out. No, I'm not going to get us out. But I am going to be faithful to God and to listening to Him. And is finance going to take me, grapple at my heart in a way that would cripple me? And that's where I think sometimes I find that our finances cripple us, for good or for bad. Because some folks might be like, oh, I don't want to take that promotion because I want to honor God in the place where I am. And that's giving me too much to manage. I'm like, sometimes that's God entrusting in us much more finances that we don't even understand. And so maybe to come back to Him and say, Lord, how do I trust with you in these finances that you have given me? How do I bless your kingdom?
Yes. And especially I say for those of us living in, this very Western culture, our relationship with money is such it's just such a place of conflict. And it's one of those, like, something is going to disciple the way that you engage with money. Is it going to be the rest of the world, or is it going to be Jesus? And if it's going to be Jesus, then He's going to take a very different route than you might anticipate. Or maybe he will invite you into the route that you expected, like, oh, this is the job that I've been preparing for. But my guess is He's going to ask you to engage differently with the paycheck that's going to come out of that job than you anticipated. So either way, we need to be prepared to be discipled in the right way around our finances. And so I'm glad that we can talk about this conversation further together, because whatever area you're stepping into, you can expect discipleship to be a part of the conversation.
It is very true. And I think I'd love for us to talk about the passage, which I find that it's a very interesting passage, because the passage we've chosen is actually about Paul. And when it comes to finances, which we're so used to hearing Paul, the man of the evangelist, and bringing the gospel to all places. But the way that he starts this letter for the Philippians is actually a very interesting way on how he navigates the finances that's very different.
I'd be more than happy to dive into Philippians 4, starting in verse 10 here. How I praise the Lord that you are concerned about me again. I know you have always been concerned for me, but you didn't have the chance to help me. Not that I was ever in need, for I have learned how to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing, or with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach or empty, plenty or little. For I can do everything through Christ, who gives me strength. And even so, you have done well to share with me in my present difficulty. As I know you, Philippians, were the only ones who gave me financial help when I first brought to you the good news, and then traveled on from Macedonia. No other church did this. Even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent help more than once. I don't say this because I want a gift from you. Rather, I want you to receive a reward for your kindness. So, Joanne, I don't know where you want to start there, but you helped frame the passage into how it's going to accelerate our conversation forward. Where do you want to begin on that?
Yeah, so I think about Paul's. It's a very interesting how Paul thanks the Philippians for what they were giving. And he also then, in some very subtle, he says, I do not depend on your giving. I depend on the Lord. Right? There is this slight little thing, which many of us use that verse in a very different way. I could do all things that Christ strengthens me. Actually, what he's saying is, right, there is something about where he has his dependency, where his heart is with the Lord. Right? That is where his dependency comes from, which I think so much of, as one, I confess, I have been one that have misused that verse in multiple ways. But if you look at it in the context of what Paul is speaking about, Paul is really going at the fact that his dependency, where he gets the ability to do the ministry that God has called him, comes from the strength in the Lord. So it's a very pivot on the way that he begins to talk about that. And I do think Paul understands our issues with raising funds or getting our finances. He gets it, right? He's not like, ignorant to the process.
I remember it was in my early years on staff. And again, I kind of named the tension that I felt of, all right, single income household while my wife is going to grad school. I actually heard this verse. It was at like one of my first chapter camps that I brought students to. And the speaker for the week touched on specifically what it is to be content in all circumstances. And especially reading this passage then within the context of like, okay, here's my income. God blessed me in providing all the funding that I needed, but still, I wouldn't say I knew how to be fully content living in a garden level apartment that had no air, right? There's plenty of things that I wished I could have had more for myself, but it challenged me with the question of, how do I be content with what I have, with what God has provided for me? And will God even provide for me when I don't think I have enough, right? Not even just thinking about it from a funding perspective, but thinking about the job market for recent graduates. Like working with students who are currently experiencing that right now, that is not an uncommon fear or concern that even ranging down to some of the juniors that I'm working with, right? They're already actively thinking about that. So I think especially adding this, like, what does it actually mean to be content? Not just in need, but maybe it might even be worth exploring. What does it look like to have plenty as well and be content with that?
Yeah. I just think it's very fascinating that he talks about, contentment in either one of these places, because so often maybe this is just a me thing, but my mind goes to the Lord is going to provide. And that means where I have my budget set is what the Lord is going to provide. And what, at least my interpretation of what Paul is saying here, is sometimes actually where I have my budget set, I am living in a place where I am in need. The funding does not quite reach the resources that are coming in does not quite reach the budget that I have set. And yet the Lord is discipling me to be content in those places and to trust I have enough for now, and he will continue to take me through. So it's possible that some of our grads are going to have to say yes to a job that pays significantly less than they anticipated. And for them to say, what does it look like for me to adjust my expectations and to say that this is enough? The Lord is saying that for now, this is enough. I will be content. I will move forward. And granted that we have, it's a different conversation when we're talking in the realms of like poverty line and things like that. I understand that like this is a much deeper conversation than just, I'm not getting paid quite as much as I had hoped. But still that there is this place of what does it look like for me to lean into the Lord and to trust and to be content where I'm at, and knowing that he will carry me through each of these places. It's just, it's an interesting perspective to me that Paul brings, because it's different than the one that I oftentimes bring to the picture.
I think that when I look at finances, I think about what's the opportunity that others have to join me in the process. And so I have realized that sometimes letting people know where my finances are gives them the opportunity to provide in ways that they can. Right. So that's actually, for me, the element of community in this. Paul invites the church to participate. Yeah. And he doesn't, he says it. There are some who didn't. And you guys did. And so there is something that he wanted it to be held a credit to them. Which that to me means that he wants them to be blessed. There's a blessing in that giving that he's giving to them because they provided for him. And I think that balance between those two things is an interesting thing about if he made his need known, right? And then he was able to be blessed. I wonder for some of us who are in isolation of not saying, I'm not going to disclose what my finances are, where I'm feeling the lack of. Yeah. We're not getting the help that we should be getting from others, right? So even I think about those in the marketplace, like, are you really letting know what you might need? Right. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're settling. Maybe you are, right? And I think those are the questions about we need to, and back to the same where we started, where's my heart at? Are we able to be honest and open about where we are financially and what might be the other things that are on our plate? Like I could see a 22-year-old, you don't need a big salary. Yeah, you'll be fine with just a little bit. But we forget to ask, right? Are there people you're caring for? Are there people that in your circle, right, that you might need to have financial responsibility for. And those are things to consider that's different from just you're a 22-year-old, you can make it with just a little bit.
Yeah, and I feel like that also has the potential to discount the possibility of like, what if the Lord wants to use this 22-year-old as a place to funnel his resources to other places and people? Like, so maybe what I need to do is can I ask my boss, like, hey, can I get a raise? And your boss might say yes to that just because on the basis of merit alone, there could be opportunity. Or are there people in your church community that you could say, like, man, I'm struggling to make ends meet. Could I come and have a meal with you once a week? And that would really just help alleviate some of these things. And so there could be opportunities to ask, or there could be opportunities if you are one who has been blessed with much to say, like, where are the places where maybe somebody else is experiencing that lack that I could be funneling the Lord's resources?
Yeah, I do. I love that perspective, right? Because I think we would then be changing the way our culture talks about finances.
Yeah.
And it's countercultural. It's a way of looking at our finances in a way of, so I'm reminded of the Old Testament where the Levites had to live off of other folks.
Right.
And, they were not given land. They were given and so they were being cared by others. I wonder how we in this stage of our culture, of the way we have been feeling, right? Finances are something that is, like Lucas said in the beginning, it's sticky. We don't talk about it in the way we could be talking about it. We don't talk about it in a way that could be of a blessing for other people. We don't look at it in that way, that God has entrusted us with such things and we could use it to bless. And then it stops us from seeking other things, right? When I said yes to being in ministry, I was afraid about the finances. I have to be honest, right? I didn't know where finances were going to come from. But I still was able to look beyond that and say, okay, God, if in my childhood, through my life, you have provided in ways that I don't even understand, why would you stop now?
Right.
And so we talked about the attributes of God. He's been faithful.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he's not going to stop being faithful.
Yes.
Lucas, you were going to add something.
I was just going to say, like, I'm bringing it back to that point of God being faithful, but also, I'm still sitting with this, and it's been a minute since I chimed in, but I'm still sitting with this reality of, like, is it easy to be content? Like, I still ask myself that question of, like,
no.
Given everything that we just laid out, is it still easy to be content? Like you said, John, I experienced the same thing where my budget bar is this high. You know what? We're sliding in under it this year. Is that going to be, can I be content with that? Will God still be faithful? Will God still provide in that? The answer is yes, but and here we go back to naming, like, the reality of being okay with it. Like, sometimes it's difficult for me to be content, either with what I feel, the lack of what I have, or we can talk about the posture of having more than enough and still maybe even having the desire of having more than enough still isn't enough. So what does it look like to be content in both of those circumstances as well? Because I also acknowledge there might be some people coming out who land the big fish job and they're absolutely crushing it, but how do we still be content with little or with plenty, as Paul mentions? And I've been sitting with this reality as we've been talking of, like, I can sit here and tell you just be content, and I'm like, man, and I still struggle with that myself. So I understand that's not an easier said than done is maybe what I'll end my piece on there.
Yeah. Do the two of you have helpful thoughts about what it looks like to cultivate contentment? I don't know if that's a direction that you want to lean into for right now. That could be a whole other conversation just in and of itself. But I don't know if briefly, if you have a couple of, like, contentment does seem to be at the heart of some of this, is something that we need to cultivate. So have there been helpful things that you have done in the realm of finances that have been helpful for developing a heart of contentment? Whether with much or with little?
This is like such a practical one for students coming out. And maybe you're even like 3-4 years into the workforce. And maybe it hasn't been just like a sit down. I just need to evaluate what God has provided me each month. And where am I stewarding what God has entrusted to me each month? And maybe there are areas where God is saying, hey, I have provided for you, but how are we, like, stewarding that in and of ourselves too? So it sounds cheesy to say, like, set a budget, but also I think that's like a form of examine in and of itself of,
Absolutely.
hey, where has God provided for me? How am I stewarding what God has provided for me? Because at the end of the day, like finances are God's. The $20 bill you have sitting in your wallet right now, like that is God's, but he's entrusted that to you to steward that. So like I've started to view budgeting as a form of examine in a way of, okay, what has God provided us in this month? Where are we stewarding that? Like, yes, Joanne, you mentioned earlier, a working man is worth his wages. We're going to make sure we have food in front of us, a roof over our head. We're going to make sure the cat has food in front of her every week too. But where are we stewarding our finances otherwise as well? Gosh, she has a whole budget line and it's larger than I want it to be. But you know what? God has given us great joy and peace through her as well. And so, but anyways, I bring that all to say, I think budgeting in the form of examine, where has God been faithful? Where is God providing for me or for my family currently?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun that you said budget because, budget's not the thing that I want to write a budget. I want to keep to it. I want, yay, budget times, right? It is not what I love. Yet my husband is very much about that. And for him, it's important because he has a heart of generosity. Mm-hmm. And so oh my gosh, it's very difficult to be married to someone who has generosity as one of their core values because he forces me to be content in the things we have. Like he really brings back that question to me about, we have enough, we have this. Do you find joy in what we have? And so I think for some of us might be to explore, what does generosity look like? And especially when it comes, because we could be generous with our time. We tend to be generous with all these other things, but when finance comes, we're like, question mark.
Yes.
Right. And we hold to ourselves. And so I think for me, that being married to someone who is very highly generous, and that is one of his traits, has taught me to see money differently, to see the resources we have a different way, to engage with money in a very different way. And I just was like, that generosity question has always been something that I come back to. So where do I find my contentment? Am I being generous with what I have? Am I being generous with the things that I have? And am I going to be okay with what I have? Yes. Yeah, I've been okay. I'm good, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the difference of engaging, where he does budgets and then he could actually allows him to be generous. And he's constantly back and forth challenging me. And so I think to go back, I think we've said a lot about community. I wonder, right? How are the people around you? How are they shaping you in your view of finances? I think that's an important question for us to really engage about. How do we respond when people around us are talking about what they have? And do we feel like, I can't believe that, right? Examine ourselves. Why is that disturbing to us? Why is that bothering me? And then think about, Lord, help me to see, what is it that I'm not, I think we talked about this. Where is it that I'm not finding my heart to be at peace? Where is it that my heart feels a little bit disturbed by this? And I think that's important for us to do that. I think I would wonder to be in Paul's shoes and think about, how did this man find contentment in all of what he was doing and all of what he experienced? He was able to say, the Lord is where I find my contentment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a little bit mind-boggling.
Well, and I think that's, this was the other thing I wanted to add on to at the end here, Joanne, is like, I think you nailed that on the head of like, ultimately, maybe God is calling you to the profession of educating the youth of America, being a teacher in our schools. And I understand the financial tensions that may or may not come from that, right? But is following God's calling for you more important than the financial aspects of that? And like, that's where you nailed it, Joanne, of like, our contentment comes from God. Are we willing to trust that his calling for us can bring us contentment regardless of whether we have little, whether we have plenty? Maybe God is calling you to a higher paying position to manage people below, whatever it may be, right? Like, is God's calling for you in that regard enough to bring you contentment? And can you rest on that?
Yeah, which then tells me that if we are not actively cultivating in life after graduation, in these early formative days, if we are not actively cultivating our relationship with Jesus, then this other contentment and our finances, they're going to be lopsided. Like we are immediately putting ourselves at a disadvantage of like, okay, if I want to have finances that are fully surrendered to Jesus so that I can say yes to his calling in my life, so I can be faithful to his calling, whether that's to high paying or low paying, if we are not purposefully leaning into cultivating that relationship with Jesus, then we are going to be hampered majorly in being able to develop appropriate kinds of contentment and stewards of the resources that he does give to us, and being able to be vulnerable and reaching out to our community, because we can say it, but if we are not doing it of Jesus is where I find my contentment, then it's just we're shortchanging ourselves in being able to do that effectively. Which feels obvious to say, like, of course, our alumni are doing this. But probably many of them would be like, actually, I'm kind of having a hard time doing that because I'm not with my chapter and my normal rhythms anymore.
Right.
And that needs a lot of purposeful focus to be developing in that way.
I was saying, Joanne mentioned that too. How is your community shaping that, right? That's most commonly our InterVarsity community is stripped away. We're still in contact with them on text, via socials, whatever it may be. But yeah, totally.
Yes.
That communal aspect that keeps us accountable has been stripped away. Yeah, I think Joanne's point stands even more valid there. What is your community forming you? What is your community around you helping you form in your financial perspective?
Yes. Are there any other sort of practical tips or things to be thoughtful here that we haven't touched on that we want to make sure we don't miss?
I was just going to say community for some of us will be the local church. And so I don't want to dismiss that. I want to name it very clearly that it is the local church.
Yes.
And so we may have all our qualms about the local church, but actually that is one of the places where the Lord allows us to live in community.
Yep.
And so no one's paid me to say that, but I think it's important for us to say it.
That is very important. Very important. That in addition to doing the work of cultivating a relationship with Jesus after graduation, you must be putting in the work to cultivate your local church community as well. And that relation. Thank you for saying that overtly, because I think that's another place like, oh, of course, I'm gonna go to church after graduation and fit in and all. It's like it takes work. It takes work. You have to be purposeful. So I'm glad that you said that overtly. So then we've given some thoughtful things to be considering here in the realm of finances, and it's a lot. This, if it hasn't come across, alumni, your discipleship in finances is going to be potentially, and I would say even likely, is going to be a tough place of discipleship. It just is. It just is. So that's why we want to talk about it purposefully. In the midst of this challenging place of discipleship, do either or both of you have a final word of encouragement for our alumni as they're thinking about this potential barrier of finances in life after graduation?
I will say my thing has been, as one who has depended on others to give towards the work I do, I have been delighted by how God provides. And so every day, my prayer is, Lord, how will you surprise me? And most of the time is in finances. And he's just, I'll give you a simple, this is like the dumbest thing, but I had been to a store. I saw a pair of socks. I thought, oh, these are so cute. And if I would have spent that money, I wouldn't have been able to buy something else. So I was just like, I won't buy the socks. Just walk out of the store. The desire and the thing that I wanted, I just left it alone. In the mail, believe it or not, I get a pair of socks from a friend of mine who says, I was thinking of you. And I know you like socks. And so it's the most dumbest thing. But it was the thing of my heart to know that God knew the desire of my heart. He knew how to surprise me. He knew how he put it. I was like, God, you saw me. You heard me, right? And so in the simplest little thing like that, what does it look like for us to ask each day, God, would you surprise me today? How would you surprise me today? Especially when it comes to finances. Lord, how would you, right? The same unexpected bonus for my husband. Like, what? He got an unexpected bonus, right? Those are the little things that sometimes it's the thing of God saying, I see you. I see you. And so I would encourage you to pray for those surprises. Yeah. Lord, how would you surprise me today? And awesome. It could be this merger that you're doing in the job, and you're like, it happened, and I can't wait. And that's just a reminder: God sees you. God sees you wherever you are. So that would be my pastoral word. Pray for the surprises that God would have for you today.
That's awesome.
Even if it sucks.
Amen to that. I hear that. Yes.
I just want to clarify that Joanne said, even if it's socks, not even if it sucks.
Correct. S-O-C-K, sucks.
Oh man. I feel like that story is just like the epitome of what I do hope people get to experience and how they handle their finances is being open to how God will actually provide in the smallest of things, like socks, S-O-K-C-K-S. Goodness, I can't even spell now because I was so good. I think maybe the one thing that I would add is I think it's a gift to learn how to be content. It's not like a command or something. In some ways, maybe you could consider it a command, but I think it's a gift to learn how to be content. It's not okay, I'm in want. Well, okay, I guess I should try and figure out to be happy with what I have. It's a gift to be content with God. And my prayer would be that new grads can receive it as such, whether it is, oh man, not quite the apartment I wanted to be living in right now, or okay, maybe I do need to go to ask if I can come have a meal with a family at church, like you mentioned, John. Can we still be content and receive contentment as a gift and not just like a solution to a problem?
Alumni, what if the number on the bottom of your paycheck isn't what determines enough? What if it's a well-cultivated sense of contentment and a mustard seed-sized faith that God will provide? I don't want to paint a picture that suggests that following Jesus in your calling means you're going to live an impoverished life. I think you might actually be surprised at the extremely generous and sometimes extremely inventive ways that God comes through to supply your needs. But I do want to make it clear that you might also have to alter your expectations and assumptions around what enough really is. Our culture of abundance in the West has done a number on us in this way, and we all have some work to do on this area, I guarantee that. But I also guarantee that God is right here, right now, ready and willing to provide for exactly what you need as you say yes to Him and to the calling that He has placed on your life. That you can take to the bank for sure. Joanne and Lucas, thank you once again for joining us for this important conversation. Alumni, come back next week for our fourth and final barrier to calling, the future. Until then, consider sharing this episode with someone who needs to hear it, and I will see you in the after, alumni. Thanks for listening to After 4. This podcast is brought to you by the InterVarsity Alumni Relations Team, hosted and produced by John Steele, production assistance by Mike Zentera, edited by Caleb Leppert, and our After 4 theme music was written and performed by John Steele.